Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Hope you had a good weekend. So, today, as I said in the post, we're going to keep going over research methods, which is a change from the original schedule. But remember, one whole question on your AP exam is going to be on research methods. So, it wouldn't be smart for us to move on in reviewing if we don't have that a good understanding of research methods. So we're going to review it. Hopefully, I think some of you just kind of maybe rushed through it, didn't do your best work. Hopefully, that's not the same today. Hopefully, you're watching this video because we're going to go over it. And I'll give you some tips on your next one as well. So, what you have to do today, obviously, you're watching the video, complete the summative FRQ, turn that into Google Classroom, and then you have that vocab packet due by 11:59 p.m. as well. So I wanted to go over the FRQ you did on Friday. So remember, one question on your AP exam, it's going to be the second question, will look very similar to this one and the one you're going to do today as well. So let's make sure we feel good about it. If you have questions, reach out to me. Let's get those clarified sooner rather than later. So this one, right, you had a researcher that was comparing the effectiveness of massed versus distributed practice, which those are actually terms for our cognitive unit. Max or the massed practice is when you just have a 2 hour chunk the night before and you just cram it all in there. And then distributed is using the spacing effect. Rather than doing 2 hours the night before, you space it out over 4 nights, 30 minutes each night. So there was two groups. One group did the distributed practice, which was group A. Group B did the cramming or massed practice. So those would both be experimental groups. So remember, we also talked about control and experimental groups. Doesn't show up really in the FRQ, but those would be examples of experimental groups because they're both getting the manipulation. So, say for example, they could make a third group that didn't study the terms at all and then took the same test. That would be the control group because they're getting no manipulation. So remember, the control group is not getting any of the experimental manipulation. So they're all going to be tested at 7 a.m. They're going to complete a recall test. The test measured how quickly the participants recalled the definitions. That's an important part. And then it talks about what the researchers did afterwards. So the first part, operational definition of the dependent variable. So remember, operational definition means a very specific measure or statement of what that variable is. Now, a dependent variable is what is going to be measured. Issues we had with this were some of you didn't define test scores good enough, or some of you identified the different study methods as the dependent variable. But the study methods are the independent variable. Independent variable is what we believe is going to cause a change or have an effect on the dependent variable. So one way to remember that too is the independent variable is always going to be what the researcher does first. And it's going to vary between the two groups, right? So those study method was the independent variable, right? Because that's what they did first, right? They separated them into groups. They said, you're going to use this study method, you're going to use this study method. The dependent variable is what we're going to finish the research study with, and it's what everyone is going to do to measure it. All right, so the dependent variable is going to be what happens last in the actual experiment, and it's how you're going to measure the change in your research participants. So here, the operational definition is the completion of a recall test in which participants were measured in how quickly they could recall the definitions. So once again, go back, look at the prompt. It says the test measured how quickly participants recalled the definitions. And it even says measured in there, right? So make sure you read the prompt and then use the specific wording that is in the prompt. Create a hypothesis for this specific study. Remember, a hypothesis is our prediction that answers the research question. Now, some of you put the research question in there as the hypothesis, but that's not true. A hypothesis is your, a lot of times, an if-then statement that is a prediction. So a lot of you said something along the lines of, if individuals use distributed practice to study rather than massed, then they will recall definitions faster on a recall test. So two things there. You can see the independent variable is highlighted in yellow. That's in there, right? If I do this, then put the dependent variable in there, right? So then they will recall definitions faster, right? So it's always independent variable first. If I do this, that will cause this effect to happen. And we measure the effect using the dependent variable. Ethical flaw we were pretty good with. The only thing that sometimes got in the way was people didn't explain how you could fix it. So make sure you just put in there how you could fix it easily. You could just say that you need permission. And I think I might have taken some points off for people if they said permission. That was before I went back and double checked the rubric. So if you're watching the video, you want me to give you a point back because you said you just need to get their permission to give their stores, email me. I'll give you that point back. Or you could have said something, you just send the individual score to themselves. The next one, the research flaw, pretty good on this one too. It was kind of the same thing. Sometimes you didn't include how you could fix it. And one big thing is you want to make sure you include, when you're trying to fix it, you want to include terminology related to how you could fix that. So in this example, the researchers didn't control for the confounding variable of age. Obviously, if you go back, you see all the old people were in one group, all the young people in another, which is obviously could be a confounding variable. Confounding variable is a third variable that could influence the dependent variable. So obviously, recalling information is going to be more difficult when you're older. So that could have been causing changes in our data. So the researchers could have corrected this by taking all participants and randomly assigning them to group A or group B. So that was one way you could score the point there. Or you could have also said make everyone the same age. So like all the people are going to be 25 years old. However, if you said that, you would probably still want to put in there random assignment into the two groups. So whenever you have multiple groups in your experiment, you want to use random assignment. Random sampling is not the same as random assignment. Random sampling is how you create your sample group. That's more important for surveys, because surveys, right? If I did a survey for all Oconomowoc High School, I didn't want to send it to all 1,700. I could randomly sample 200 students, and it means I should get a representative sample. That's hard to do in experiments because, right, you have to get informed consent and it's people who are willing. However, you want to use random assignment when you're putting your participants into the groups. That's a good way to control for confounding variables. Last one, a lot of you got half of this right because you somewhat applied it or had it correct, but then you didn't apply it to the actual experiment. So when we talk about statistically significant, that means that the results are very unlikely to be due to chance. So in this one, said it was the difference between the two groups was statistically significant. That means, right, the p-score is less than 0.05. That means there's a very small chance that it occurred, or a very small probability it occurred by chance. What that means is it's very likely that the results were caused by your independent variable, right? And that's why it's important here in context of this experiment. If our experiment is statistically significant, it means we identified cause and effect, right? We have identified that this independent variable can cause a change in the dependent variable, which is what you want in your experiment. That's what makes an experiment unique, is we can actually see cause and effect. So the point where a lot of people lost points was you just didn't apply it to the context of the experiment. So to do that, you would say something like, for this experiment specifically, it means that the difference between the groups is very likely due to the impact of the independent variable. Not very specific, but you could say very likely due to the impact of the different study methods. So now what you're going to do, hopefully you reviewed that. Maybe you add some notes to your cheat sheet. Hopefully you still have your cheat sheet with you. You're going to go ahead, same format here, turn it in when you're done. Very similar questions, but just a different prompt now. So the prompt: in a study of power and self-image, participants were told the true purpose of the study. So we got a little deception, and then it goes into the description there. So you're going to provide operational definition. So remember a specific statement. And when you are putting that specific statement in, go back and take the exact wording from the prompt. So you have operational definition for the high power group, low power group, and then dependent variable. Explain how the researchers should control for confounding variables when placing subjects in the two different groups. So terminology is going to be, there's an important term to include there. And then explain what statistical significance means in the context of this study. So exactly what we just went over. And then explain why debriefing would be necessary in the study. So when you get your AP exam, it's likely that you're going to have an experiment presented to you, and they're going to ask you to look at independent variable versus dependent variable, research design, and then ethical standards. So that's why we keep going over these. So get this done, turned in, email me if you have any questions. The other thing to keep in mind is you have to finish up your vocab packet, get that turned into Classroom by the end of the day. Talk to you later. Have a good day.